is a video series about people who are fearlessly fighting the language barriers for their companies and customers. Many people have gone before them over the millennia of human civilization. The stories are sometimes heroic, but oftentimes end in lost fortunes. This time though, it's different. The technology is ready. Nobody needs to suffer from the foreign language barrier any longer. The world is becoming massively multilingual. Let's talk with the gurus who make this happen.
Hello, and welcome to the first TAUS Talks episode. We live in a time of change, that's for sure. And TAUS Talks is here to help you get all the insights and inspiration you're used to from TAUS through conversations with personalities and gurus, thought leaders in our industry. And my co-host for today is Paula Shannon. Hi, Paula. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here and see everybody. And we are so lucky today to have Francis Tsang with us. It's important to understand just the background and why we refer to Francis as the éminence grise of the localization industry. He is currently head of international engineering at LinkedIn, but that's just the crown in what is a very long and distinguished career in software and localization. And he has worked for companies going back to Wang Laboratories, long stints at Apple, a hugely transformative amount of time at Adobe, and time at Sun Microsystems, Macromedia, and now at LinkedIn. And you know, we would be remiss if we also didn't mention that Francis served as one of the founding board members of TAUS. Francis has touched every aspect of the localization industry, and we are delighted, Francis, to have you here with us today.
Yeah, thank you for all the kind words. Introduction, Paula. It's great to be here.
I was thinking back to your interview with TAUS last August, I think it was, where you, the quote that we used was, "Do it better the second time around." And there you identified the three Ps. There's been so many changes, of course, since August. It's only a few months ago, but the world is completely different. At TAUS, we are now very much promoting this massively multilingual concept. So we're kind of excited to hear an update on this from you in the new massively multilingual world.
So this is a very complex question because it's not only about, from a workflow perspective, what changed over time, and most important part is what enabled those changes, and then at the same time, how do we actually take advantage of it at the end? So I think the changes that you just mentioned about the massively multilingual, I think really the crux of it is not just about the technology also improving, but the most important part is the availability of the data. And when you have availability of both language data and other type of data, can actually help you to improve the usage of the technology. Because the technology probably the same technology, but it just happened to be a lot more deeper into the use case now. So I think because of that changes, and then sometimes it takes a crisis or pandemic in our case right now, accelerate some of those growth. When you see acceleration, your response is either you use the same method, try to do faster, or you try to rethink about what the fundamental bottleneck is to address some of those growth, and even actually try to take advantage of those opportunities for growth. I think for me, if you look at the industry right now, it's not only just about redoing what we used to do, just faster and cheaper. Even as the industry, we talk about that for so many times. You say, how can we make the unit price cheaper? How can we actually drive the cost low at the same time not driving our profit? But that's the wrong direction altogether. So the reason why it's wrong, because that didn't change our so-called fundamental view of the problems. And I think right now, those growth so-called phenomenal, at the same time, some of the major events happen, force us to rethink about how we address some of these problems. Because technology right now is there. If you think about most of the machine learning, particularly the one in a language space, now the question is, how can we take advantage of this opportunity to fundamentally rethink about how we should scale the way we do things? Instead of everybody deploy their own empty engine and try to massively use that engine for different so-called services and products that they have. Instead of doing that and try to do it like hundreds of millions of times around the world, can we actually do a lot more so-called leverage and scalable way, so that we can either share some of those ideas or even share some of those resources? It's about how do we work together and fundamentally see the driving force behind all the changes, and how can we actually take advantage of it? What does it take to change our workflow, to change our collaboration model, to change our partnership in some cases, so that we can deploy newer services or newer products based on those technology and data we already have. So it is sort of the doing better the second time. Is what it really means is we have to rethink about how we got there first, and then now we have to do it again, but probably differently.
I'd love to ask you a follow-on question about this and dive maybe a bit deeper into it, because I agree with you. I mean, essentially, listening to you, you know, what we're both saying is that witnessing even these quantum leaps, you know, in neural machine translation and new approaches, the translation industry itself seems to tend towards cost-based compromises, you know, for lack of a better way of describing it, rather than taking a more radical view of the possible positive impacts on true business goals. Specifically for you at LinkedIn, I would love to know, you know, what business intelligence or data do you use to make some of these decisions?
I think any sort of global product or global platform product has an advantage, because almost like by definition, your mission or your vision or your overall business goal is to reach the world. So then the question is not about ROI, so to speak, it's more about opportunity cost. We should really just find a way to, what's the best way for us to get to all of these eventually? So that's actually much easier conversation in so many ways, because almost like everybody agree that we have to get to all of them. We have to get to most of them at least as soon as possible. So now the question really is about what does it take to scale? And like give you an example is, most of the time when we look at the world, we look at white space. The most important part is we look at the white space in a meaningful way. Meaningful means who actually can take advantage of this product, who can actually get value out of this product. And then look at how many of them actually will actually do that in this particular segment. It could be in an industry, it could be in a language group or language speaking group, or could be in a country altogether. So the white space is a very important question for us. And at the same time, most important part, the second question to ask is about our own readiness to serve that white space. Because a lot of time, it's not just about localizing a product. In that case, very simple, just like, you know, spend some money and then get something translated and eventually make sure the workflow continue to translate all the subsequent content. So that's a very easy conversation. But the readiness itself could be much more complex, because it's not only just about so-called the availability of those content, it's really about do we have the intelligence to actually help you to find those things, help you to connect you to those things. And those intelligence, we call it sometimes the data, but in that case, it's really, really hard to discover. And even if you discover it, it doesn't mean that you can actually make it work automatically in all the machine learning models that you have. So that type of deep sort of data intelligence readiness really is the bottleneck of the growth, because it's not just about making decisions of going now or going later. It's really about identify a way to improve our own scalability, saying, you know, what does it take for us to get there faster? And in order to address that, it's not about brute force and so-called linearly scale the organization addressing one language or one country at a time, but actually producing some kind of scalable architecture and also scalable process, so that we can address some of those readiness questions as quickly as we can, also as scalable as we can. You try to make international everyone's job. So international is not just one team's job. It takes a village to raise a child. It does take a village to raise a child in this case, because it really takes every aspect of the company. So going back to scaling the people part of the problem, is really about making sure everyone feel that going international, going global is part of their responsibility. And they should also share part of the success and failure in some cases.
Well, we're now, I think, about 2 months into at least the coronavirus global crisis. We just talked about all the efforts in getting world ready, evolution or reinvention of our industry, and the new opportunities and boosts that the advancements in AI are giving us. So what do you think the impacts of this global crisis and the coronavirus will be, or already is, on this in our industry?
I think the impact is so big that it's so hard to even describe it in a short sentence. Because, I mean, think about the way we do things right now are definitely very different than how we do it maybe even 3 months ago, right? The fact is, all three of us have not been traveling for a little while. All three of us has not been physically in one conference room for a little while. So that means things become a lot more virtual, things become a lot more remote. And most important part is a lot of these things become less synchronous, because the fact is you cannot get everybody sort of meeting at the same time, doing things at the same time. So you have to prepare any content, any material, or any even conversation, and make it ready for a asynchronous situation. The conversation can happen in a very long tail fashion. And when we change the way we engage in conversation, and clearly a lot of technology, a lot of tools, a lot of even mentality needs to be addressed. Give you one example is, yes, you know, we see the whole video conferencing situation right now in the last few weeks around the world has been growing so fast that not only put pressure on all the service provider, which they have been scaling extremely well. So to answer your question, Anamai, is we change in the way we do things, but we also expose the gap, infrastructure or other sort of capacity gap in certain areas. And that gaps may actually drive us to respond to those new ways or new so-called application differently. You know, some would say, okay, fine, I'll actually continue to use a very remote, asynchronous, and also virtual way of doing things, and just be fine, because everybody will be able to access. We enjoy that inclusion sort of a communication style. But for the groups of people that don't have that luxury, or don't have that enabling sort of conditions, what are they going to do? They might have a very different response to it. So the long-term impact, if you ask me about the pandemic situation right now, is because of that gap getting exposed. And those gaps, some of them will probably take time to fix. So if you apply that into our industry, you know, some company or service providers or even independent contributors, they have those readiness to basically change the way they do things and take advantage of it and even actually get better at it. But some of them may not. But so the one that don't, what's going to happen to them? So I think that's going to be something for the industry to ponder. This is one of those crises that it will be terrible for us to waste. If we don't take advantage of this as an industry, try to address some of this fundamental issue of workflow, fundamental issue of data repository, how do we collaborate, how automatic technology can help to assist and accelerate people's productivity. If we don't address in a fundamental way, particularly try to apply it to different situations. So it's a long answer to your question, but it's a really, really, I would say, exciting, at the same time, very big task on our shoulders. And I wish the industry can actually work closer together and address them.
Well, next month, actually, we are organizing a virtual conference with the title Reinventing the Translation Industry. That will be very much on this whole question, like where will the industry be next year in the summer of 2021? We've already published an article with 4 scenarios that we thought of doing the scenario-based planning technique. So what do you think of these 4 scenarios? Do you have an idea which scenario will be in next year?
That's a hard one, because scenario depends on which axis do you use in terms of getting that quadrant. And I think technology definitely is changing in different pace. Different part of technology also changing different pace, and also the need for some of those applications or technology or services are also changing. So going back to what I just said about some of the pandemic sort of impact or implications that we're seeing right now, is that divide. I think the divide and the inequality in some cases will drive some of those scenarios. One thing that I learned from this pandemic is really about everything becomes livelihood and living question. When everything's life and livelihood, then it becomes real. It's not just about making more money or making less money for a company. It's not about making your market share 0.1% higher or 0.2% higher. Yes, those are important, but that's not the most important thing in our life. But in this case, I think the industry can take I would say a longer term view of how to improve people's life and livelihood, starting with our own sort of constituents. At the same time, all the business around it. And I think we can start with that. And then eventually, of course, including our, so-called direct sort of users of what we produce as industry, but focusing on their life and livelihood. And the more we can do that, I think the more impactful and meaningful that our scenario would be. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the solution also could be. So I didn't give you a direct answer what the scenario could be, but I give you some of the possibility that I think will make the scenario more meaningful.
Great, yeah. Well, we're looking forward to having a lot of people in our virtual conference and talk with us about the changing landscape. And at TAUS, we are, of course, advocating the reinvention of our industry. So that's our aim, to get a lot of ideas and perspective shared at the conference, and have that collective intelligence to really reinvent the industry. So thank you so much, Francis, for all your words today. And Paula, thank you so much for joining me for today's.
I looked forward to this. This was high on the list to have a chance to spend time with Francis. So really enjoyed it.
The pleasure's all mine. And I hope the conversation is just the beginning of it, because I really hope that more people in the industry will feel strongly about looking after more people around the world. And I think this is the time. And the fact that we have the know-how, and we have the technology, and we also have even the vehicle to deliver some of those know-how and technology. I think it's time to actually for us to step up in some way. And I love one thing that Sammy Beckett's quote: "Ever try, ever fail, no matter. Try again, fail better." And I think this is exactly what we at that moment. And try again, even fail again, but fail better.
I really loved how you closed, Francis, because I think that's why Anna and I wanted to ask that question. Obviously, it's a great question, but I love what you talked about, because as opposed to like just a stock answer about how, the language industry already was global, we are set up to work virtually, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I've repeated that ad nauseum, but I really like the more thoughtful and reflective about what is valuable in our lives, what is important. It's great in a sense, because it sounds like that's where LinkedIn's head is at too. Like, it's the livelihood connected to the life, right? But for everybody, we're living through this bizarre commingling of life and livelihood and family and home and health and happiness, and I think we are parsing through what is essential for that.
Thank you. It's all my pleasure.
If you also want to break down the language barriers for your company and your customers, you need your language data to work for you. TAUS, the Language Data Network, provides data and tools for machine learning and for business intelligence.